Welcome to the Decide to Move podcast, helping entrepreneurs like you make smart, pivotal shifts in your life and business. Tune in each episode for inspiring stories from brilliant business minds and trailblazers to find out how they made their big moves and how you can too. Now here's your host, author, speaker, business strategist, CEO, and founder of Decide to Move, Monica M. Bijou.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode. And today is no different than any other time where I have an amazing guest that's here with me. Today, I have with me Ben Ivey. He is the CEO and founder of the Entrepreneur Lifestyle. He helps entrepreneurs that are overwhelmed to become more efficient and boost their business success. And that's what he's going to talk to us about today. How do you reduce overwhelm so that way you can actually continue to boost your business without getting bogged down? And we definitely need these strategies today because with everything happening, not only are you trying to build a business, but you're managing, the pandemic, managing family, dealing with the fact that so many people hadn't been able to see family for quite a time because of the fact of worrying about the pandemic. So I am so happy that Ben is here to join us today so that he can teach us some really good strategies to keep from being overwhelmed. So without further ado, hi, Ben. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Most definitely. I am so glad that you're here. So can you tell my audience and yours too, our listeners, a little bit more about yourself? Like, who are you and what's been your journey to get you here?
Sure. So I started in entrepreneurship at a pretty young age. I've been doing this podcast long enough and people are asking, when did you first start? And I first started when I was about 12 years old. And in England, we have these things called Freddos, right? They're like these little chocolate bars. I'm not sure if you've got them in the US, right? And they were about 10p and I was selling them for 20p and I got this box. And I started my venture. It went very well, right? And unfortunately, about 3 weeks later, I got shut down by one of the teachers when all these 10p's and 20p's fell out the locker. They were asking what I was doing in school, which is quite funny. I was competing with the tuck shop at the time, which is quite amusing. So that was probably my first experience of entrepreneurship. And then years went by, I started a few different projects here and there. But I really hit home when I started a business at university where I started to import and export bags around the UK. So it was my first kind of venture diving into business properly. So I started to expand that, ran that for a few years. And then I dived into an app and I was running an app. We ended up being based out in Silicon Valley and it was a virtual reality app to help people learn. And as I was building up the app, I was someone that was very focused on being successful so that I could inspire other people. But at the time, I was just working incredibly hard. And I genuinely would see people on the weekend chilling out, relaxing. And in my mind, Monica, I said, these people are lazy. I'd see people take a Sunday off. And I'm not even joking. I remember it so well. Looking at me that is a lazy entrepreneur right there. They don't even care about their business. Look at them going for a walk in the park. Look at me, right? Coding on Facebook or whatever, right? Crazy. So as I was going through that, right, I realized I had these challenges. And I ended up having a moment that really, shifted my life completely. I got to see one of my heroes. So I was getting really excited, got in the car, drove, saw the hero, and it was absolutely fantastic. But what I didn't know is that my hero was actually very, very lost. And the very next day, my hero committed suicide. And I had absolutely no idea. And if you'd been with me a week later, you'd have found me sitting on a bench and it was a beautiful blue sky outside, but this was in complete contrast to what was going on inside of me and inside of my mind. And I remember sitting in a dark room and seeing a sea of faces, all of Mark's family and friends, hoping there was something that I could say that can make them feel better about this situation. And if anyone listening, imagine losing someone that you really, really care about, someone that has meant so much to you, just like that. But the truth is, Mark was more than just a hero to me. Mark was actually family to me. Mark was actually my dad. And to lose him after seeing him the day before really shook my world as an entrepreneur. And I ended up quitting my business. And I started to search into what is it that we really do in life? Why do we do what we do? And the first thing was to figure out what happened to him, but also to figure out, is he the only person that struggled with that? And how do we as entrepreneurs really build ourselves without getting that burnt out and that overwhelmed. So I started teaching neuro-linguistic programming out in China. I started going into all the different seminars, Tony Robbins, Annie Harrington, Alan Kleinhans, all these different people to kind of gain that knowledge and really figure out what it was to be human. And as I was going on that journey, I started to help people with all things like public speaking, productivity, relationships, you name it. I was just giving it a go as I started hustling and started to kind of build up a coaching practice. And as I started to work more and more, I started to find that I would attract a lot of entrepreneurs, because very often as an entrepreneur, it can become incredibly isolating, because the more successful you become, often the more isolated you feel. And I started to notice these patterns, and I started to work with more and more entrepreneurs. And then in about 2017, I had a guy come up to me called Mark who said, Ben, I'd love to be able to do what you do. Can you teach me? And Mark, I said, no, I can't, because I have spent years doing that. Do you have any idea how long it would take me? Well, that's just no way, right? We laughed about it. A few months later, I said, I'm ready to do that. I'd filmed some videos and given the foundation and kind of build the program along the way. And a few years later, I now have multiple trainers in different places. And I built up a business really helping people gain the skills to be extraordinary coaches and speakers and really build their business. And then at the same time, I started to hone in specifically on entrepreneurs and start to really build up that basis to move them forward. And I feel very blessed that literally December last year, just before the lockdown, I was out in China. I did a keynote for HSBC with the senior leadership and started to really build that up. And now I feel very blessed that I've digitalized a lot of my business this year. It's an unusual year this year, as I'm sure you're aware. And I feel very lucky now that I've got all the digital materials to really help people offline and not just have to do all my events offline as I've done so much over the years.
Yeah, and without you realizing, there's a couple parts to your story. I'm going to start with the end and then go forward.
Let's do it.
The thing about it is, by you digitizing your programs, you're allowing yourself to be scalable, because in that way you can actually do other things and then have that residual, like a membership site or something like that, which makes it super great. But the thing, first, I also want to offer my condolences about losing your father, because I know losing my father as well, it's a very hard thing. I mean, like, most people say like the mom and the daughter really bond, but my dad was like my pea in my pod. I mean, like, honestly, he actually had labor pains when my mother was pregnant with me. She didn't even know she was in labor. He felt it. So we were like connected from the very beginning. So I know that's a very hard thing. And I look up to the way that he handled life as my hero of, that's why I am the way I am, is because of him. So I definitely understand exactly what you're saying on that front. And for you to eventually use the things that your dad taught you and take the lessons from that and turn it into something positive is so huge and massive, honestly, that some people get stuck and they don't know how to take the hurt and their pain and turn it to something that they can help other people. What were some of the things that you had to do in order to say, this is what I want to do now to help other people, even though I'm hurting?
Well, I think it's an incredibly challenging journey, and I think that probably a lot of people can relate to this while listening to it, of facing these extraordinary challenges that we're not really expecting, and figuring out how can I do this. And for me at the time, and I do think there's a lot of people going through this as well, is that I wanted to be able to give back, and I really wanted to have an impact. So I started to gain skills helping people with suicide prevention, and like genuinely helping entrepreneurs that are even suicidal, and I've helped a few, and it's been amazing to really help them move past that. But the biggest challenge is to differentiate between a give back and a business. And I think that that's a huge differential that a lot of people don't get, which is why you have these people that have huge hearts, they're overgivers, they clearly love what they do, but they're in loads of debt and their business is doing terrible. And it's such a shame, because you have someone that is such a giver, but they do not understand how to build a business where they have that exchange of value and they can actually focus on what matters to really help someone move forward. And that was a huge challenge for me, figuring out who is my target market and how can I also give back to those people at the same time. And differentiating between the two has been amazing to be able to build my business much more sustainably, as opposed to questioning my prices, like, do I negotiate, and all these challenges that I think a lot of people face.
Yeah, it's so true. That's like for me, understanding your why. Like, why did you go into business? Mine has to do with having a ranch style foster home where I'm helping children that are in foster homes connect with animals that have been abused so that they can learn how to trust and all the things that go with that. And so, understanding that, yes, I want to be super successful because I want to be able to help them. So, that's totally two different things. I'm not going into foster homes and giving everything, and then it's like, oh, okay. So, yes, and that's super huge and important. And I've often have, being I'm in the military, and I often help veterans, transition from being on active duty to being uh, back in the world, I should say, civilianized
Yes.
is what we call it. And most of them struggle. Like they say, well, I have a passion to do this, to be a volunteer. And I was like, okay, well, how much money is that going to get you? There's nothing wrong with volunteering, but you're telling me that's what you want to do. That's it. Uh, so tell me how you're going to survive. Like, let's look at the numbers. And they're like, oh, I guess that's not really what I really want to do. Yeah, that's not saying it's a hobby. That's something like you want to give from a humanitarian standpoint, but for financially, what do you want to do? How do you turn that passion of giving into an actual business that's going to be sustainable for you and your family? And that is very difficult for people to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that creating that differential is very important. And I think that's, going back to the topic of overwhelm, I do think that's one of the reasons why a lot of entrepreneurs get overwhelmed, because they're spreading themselves too thin. And it's very easy to do. I mean, there's information overload, but we're starving of wisdom. So very often we've got so many choices, so many different people we can work with. And it's very difficult to make a decision that you can have complete congruency with and saying this is the best option, because there's so many different things out there.
Yeah, most definitely. So let's get into it. Can you start off with the strategies of really helping entrepreneurs that are out there right now that's dealing with the pandemic, that's given us so much, uncertainty and feeling overwhelmed with trying to maintain my business, dealing with this pandemic and all the other variations that come with it. What are some strategies that you would recommend to help them?
Sure. Well, I think when it comes to overwhelm, when we break it down, ultimately overwhelm is where you're taking too much on, right? You just felt like there's so many things and you really don't know where to start, right? So when we look into the fundamentals of that, one of the techniques that I think is really powerful is called externalizing your mind. And what I mean by that is that a lot of entrepreneurs I meet keep everything that they've got to do in their head. They're like, I've got to think of that and that and that. And the brain is a terrible storage unit, right? So it's incredibly important to have some sort of software or something that acts as the second brain to really store the things that you have to do. And I think that's where, as an entrepreneur, you can take on much more, because when we think of overwhelm, all entrepreneurs can get overwhelmed, but they have different limits. And this is where you can do certain things and have those strategies to increase your limit, increase what you're capable of. And that's the difference between someone getting overwhelmed running one business versus someone that's absolutely fine running 10.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that they can do to reduce some of that overwhelm?
Sure. So one of the things is obviously having that software. Another one, a technique that I think is really cool, is something called morning pages. It's actually something that I stole off Julia Cameron, and it's a technique to originally help with creativity, where you wake up in the morning and you write down 3 pages, no more, no less, and it kind of brainstorms everything that's going on. And I found it's an amazing way for entrepreneurs to become more aware of their own patterns so that they can start to move forward. So as an example, I had a billionaire entrepreneur who lost everything. His best friend stole his private jet, his wife had an affair, like all these crazy things. He ends up going to jail, right? Unreal, literally from the top to the bottom. And he was getting overwhelmed and couldn't figure out like why he was thinking the way he was thinking. And this was one of the best techniques he found to really understand his way of thinking and why he goes down that negative spiral. Another one that I really love is called thinking time. This is a little bit different. I got this off Keith Cunningham, and basically it is scheduling time to think. And this is strange for entrepreneurs because very often we're like busy, and we're very much working in the business. But having thinking time actually gives you an opportunity to think on the business and take a step back. And what happens is when you take a step back and you can really think about a specific type of question. So for example, a great one that I think is very powerful is, what is a 3-star, 5-star, 7-star, and 10-star experience for my clients, right? And thinking of those bigger questions, what happens is when you give yourself 45 minutes of uninterrupted time thinking about something, and then 15 minutes to kind of look and see if there's any golden nuggets there. What you do is you start to build up your business in a way where you're thinking long term and you're becoming a business owner, as opposed to becoming an overwhelmed business operator reacting to things in the day.
Yeah, I like the difference between a business operator and a business owner, because that's so true. Either you're working in your business or working on your business. Like which one are you doing? And all the things that you mentioned is stuff that I actually put in practice and do. The other big thing, so I do coaching. I'm a business coach and I'm also a therapist. And so the strategies that I do, I kind of like tweak them a little bit for each one. But one of those biggest ones is I tell people to do what's considered brain dumping, like what you were talking about in the beginning. Yeah. Get it out of you. It's like, can you go to the store with, like, when you write a grocery list, you don't think about what you need to buy anymore. You just take your list, you go out there and you go shopping. The other thing is I do a constructive worry for those worry wards, people who are anxiety. You're giving yourself permission to stress over whatever by writing it down, like literally. And they find that it reduces that because they're giving themselves permission. Like, this is my 30 minutes, however long, just to sit there and write everything that's in my mind that's bothering me. And when they're done, it's like this huge sense of like, oh, that's not even something worth stressing about. And now you can move on for something that is important. So those are really great strategies. I love that. What else? What other things?
Sure. So yeah, I think we can go on all day with regards to strategies. I think that when we look into overwhelm and dealing with challenges, I think one of the most important things is not just to figure out strategies, but to figure out why you end up getting overwhelmed and how do you actually prevent it from happening. And one of the things that I think is important is becoming aware of the questions that you ask yourself. What I mean by that is that very often, and I had a client I was chatting literally yesterday, and we were speaking about how he catastrophizes elements of his business that then causes him to go downhill. So for example, well, what happens if I don't retain the client that's bringing 70% of my income in? And if that doesn't happen, then I can't pay my employees. Now, if I can't do that, and then suddenly he feels overwhelmed because he goes on this downward spiral. And it's easy to be consciously aware of when we speak about it, but very often at an unconscious level, there's this downward spiral that very often we go through as entrepreneurs when we start to go down that sort of overwhelm spiral. So one of the things that I think is important is to be able to have a question or something that you do that can help interrupt that pattern, that avoids you going down this downward spiral. And we all have different ways to deal with it. Some people go for a walk, some people drink, some people do drugs. Like, there's loads of ways to deal with it. It's just making sure that when that happens, you have different ways to identify it and then also move out of it so that it doesn't really bog you down and stop you achieving what you want to achieve.
Yeah, and that's super huge and important. Unfortunately, so many people do get stuck, and it is very difficult for them to take that next step too, because so they are profitable and they're able to actually move forward in the next way. So I understand that you actually taught, and you mentioned it, but you did a TEDx talk in China. Did you actually speak Mandarin while you were there? Or
yeah, I did the TED talk in Chinese.
Wow, that's impressive. How many languages do you speak?
Just Chinese and English. I think that's more than enough for me.
But I heard those are actually, I heard the two hardest language. I know people who were not necessarily born in China, but they have parents that are Chinese, but they were raised in America. So they attempt to learn Chinese or Mandarin. And they have told me that it's a very hard language to learn. And then people who have attempted to learn English have said that it's very difficult to learn. So you mastered two of the toughest languages that there is.
Well, I think the language that we grow up with, right, is obviously something that we're used to and it's very natural. And I think that when I think of teaching English and people ask me, why is that? I'd be like, I haven't got a clue. It just sounds right. So I wouldn't really say I've learned English, kind of been brought up with it. But from the China side, yeah, I can definitely relate. I mean, my wife is Taiwanese. She was born in America, so also had to pick up Chinese. And there are times that we banter back and forth, and like she doesn't know a word, and I laugh, and I think it's pretty funny that I do, and we laugh about that as a family. But I think that it's certainly a challenge. But I do think as entrepreneurs, being able to set those challenges and really build that muscle of backing yourself and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this. And it's that muscle that you build over time and you become better and better at what you do to really enable you to get to another level.
Yeah, that is so true. And I always believe in challenging myself and, pushing myself to, okay, what's next? I set little incremental goals. Okay, I'm going to do this. Got it. Now what's next kind of thing. That's some of the things that I enjoy doing. So, is there I know that you said there's a lot of strategies that you can teach people. You've given some really great ones. Is there any one that really stands out the most for you to really help someone?
Sure. Well, I definitely think it depends on the person. One of the things that I often do, and I think this is important, is for people who struggle with perfectionism or over controlling behavior to be able to step back in the business. And that doesn't sound like it's directly linked to overwhelm, but you'd be incredibly surprised how often I will speak to someone and they'll lead with one thing. I'll give you an example. So I had a guy, Alex, come to me last year and he said, Ben, I see how you market online. I'd love to be able to market like you. I've got a huge issue with marketing. Can you help me? And I'm like, I don't even teach marketing, but yeah, I'll take the call because I think it's important to have a conversation. And within the first 5 minutes, I realized his issue is not marketing. He's a bit of a perfectionist. And it makes sense for the role that he's in because he runs a software development company. Right. So when you're looking at the software, it needs to be perfect. There can't be any bugs. Like you can't have something going wrong when he's running projects that are like multi-million pounds, right? However, the challenge is when you use those same tools and you apply them to marketing or other things. And what we found is that when you can overcome that, it then stops the overwhelm. For him, he was doing 16-hour work weeks. 16-hour days, like 6 days a week. He was getting completely overwhelmed. He had 12 employees, losing money every month. And you can over imagine how overwhelmed he felt. But by overcoming the perfectionism, he ends up 10xing his business. When COVID was going on, he was out in Bali. I didn't even want to speak to him. I thought it was a joke. He had the beach there whilst I was stuck in England. But I think that it's things like that I think is amazing for people to be able to see that often there is this prerequisite or this challenge that we face that causes this overwhelm. And when we directly deal with that, we can really help snowball what we're doing to really move ourselves forward.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of times we actually bring it up on ourselves of making ourselves do more work than sometimes is even necessary. Because there's so many people out there, they market the work less but earn more. But because when you have a clear mind and you give yourself a break to be creative, like you said, taking actual time out, intentional time to be, to write, to be creative and different things like that, it actually allows you it actually allows you to be more creative, to create that next great thing instead of being so dogmatic on something that may or may not work, but you're so in the middle of it, you can't see when it's actually an issue. So
I certainly agree. And I definitely think that being able to trust yourself is important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs second guess themselves and they don't have that decision-making muscle. And actually, whilst we're on that, I think one of the biggest challenges entrepreneurs face is not making decisions fast enough. Like when entrepreneurs look at this year, people are like, do I pivot? Do I not pivot? When will this end? I'm not sure. Like that's where you've got to make a decision and roll with it. And I think that if more people do that and carry on doing that, because there's still uncertainty next year, that's where you gain clarity because you've made a decision and you're sticking to your guns and you're doing it, as opposed to kind of weighing up the options and really not sure where to go.
Yeah, most definitely. I have seen people that call it analysis paralysis. I've seen that. And I'm just like, okay, can you just make a decision? Like, is better, done is sometimes is better than perfect. Can we move forward here? Because we're stuck because you're in your head right now. So Ben, how can people, well, first I understand that you have a gift for the listeners.
Yeah, of course. I've got lots of different PDFs, but the one I think that's most relevant is the 5 hacks to overcome overwhelm. So it's some similar points and some other ones that I think are the best of the best that I've found that is genuinely incredibly helpful for entrepreneurs to overcome that overwhelm and really run the business the way they want to.
Most definitely. And then, so how can people connect with you and follow you and just stay in touch?
Sure. So you can get with me on most social media. So it's Ben Ivey, so BEN Ivey, and then you can go to my website. So Ben and then -ivey.com. And then for the PDF, if you go to ben-ivey.com/overwhelm, you can download that and we can probably put the links in the description too.
Awesome. Yeah, most definitely. I put everything in the show notes. So those that are driving, please don't swerve on the side of road or try to text or write while you're driving. It's going to be in the show notes. And then those that are watching via YouTube, just scroll down to the bottom. And then that way you can actually get his information. And then don't forget to subscribe too while you're at it. So is there any last words that you have for our listeners and viewers?
Sure. I think that we work hard to enjoy life, so make sure you enjoy it. I think there's too many people nowadays not having enough fun. And I think that it is important to work on the business, but if you're not enjoying it, what's the point?
Yeah, I love that. I don't think there's anything I need to add to that. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for joining me for another episode of Decide to Move. It's been great having you as a guest. And as I always say to my audience, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Decide to Move podcast with Monica M. Bijou. If you are ready to make a pivotal shift and take your destined position in the world, then schedule a free discovery call by going to www.decidetomove.com. For all links mentioned in today's show and to listen to previous episodes, go to www.decidetomovepodcast.com. And remember, we've all been delivered rotten fruit in our past. We can choose to chew on the rotten fruit trying to convince ourselves it's what we want, or we can become the fruits of our labor and create an incredible, fulfilling, and inspiring life and business out of it. You have what it takes to create the life you want.